So I got my
Progress.
Eris, come over here and smooth my wig. Wait, my hair. I can't see it. I'm feeling crazy. I feel like it's crazy. Hurry, I gotta come a camera in a minute. You chilling. Smooth me out. Oh, Lord Jesus. You gotta do all that. It's bad, ain't it? You sure? Well, I'm looking foolish on the camera now.
Good evening, everybody. Y'all have a great Thanksgiving.
Good evening.
Hey, Dr. Lamb.
How's everybody?
Great.
Yeah, it was a good Thanksgiving. Got Vera through her proposal and got 2 more through today.
Oh, very good.
So all good.
You guys, you understand that's the next calling on you. While you're still in the mode, this is the time.
Yeah, I gave him that speech last week at the interviewing session, but it's true. There are
That's
more
very
job
true.
opportunities now than I've seen in a long while. Back in the 80s, when all of the GI Bill guys were retiring, you saw a lot of administrative turnover.
Mhm.
A lot of folks were in World War II and in the Korean War, Korean conflict. Their time. So by the early 80s, the GI Bill folks who went to school after 45 were in their 31st and 32nd year. And the Korean War folks hadn't quite gotten to the retirement phase. They came along a little bit later in the 80s, but during the 80s, because the economy and because salaries were frozen, there was a lot of turnover. And a lot of us younger folks, I know it's hard to believe that I was younger, but I was in the 80s, got opportunities a whole lot quicker than normally had been. And so I became a principal at 30 years old. I got to be principal at 30 because there were a lot of people who left the profession. That time has come again. And it's not about your age, it's not about time, it's about talent, but there are tremendous opportunities out there. And if you want your career to advance, you've got to, start with the principal. But while you're in the mode and you know what's going on, the same as the speech I gave you, now would be the time. Be thinking, bet on yourself, as I told you last week. Bet on yourself last Wednesday night. Bet on yourself. That's the only time you should ever wager, but bet on yourself and your future and your family. If you're going to stay in this business, you need to make money. You need to be rewarded. So that's the end of my spiel.
Well, I would agree with him. If you can, some of you have littles, some of you, the thought of starting a new position and taking that on, I will tell you that my favorite 2 years of school, and after you go through your master's, you're thinking, what the world, I need 2 or 3 years off. But my favorite classes were my doctoral classes. Now, I'm not going to tell you my dissertation was my favorite, but it's just a part of it. But my favorite classes out of every class I've ever taken were in the doctoral program. You build such camaraderie with your group. It's just pretty big stuff. So much that I am coaching now because I enjoy that so much, and I go over on their Saturdays and sit in some of their classes just because it's good stuff. And I do have a life outside of school, even though I'm there all the time. So, did y'all have a good Thanksgiving? Yeah? Y'all ready for Saturday? Bright and early. So Saturday we will be meeting at 7:30. Dr. Booker will open us up at 7:30. And we will then go into high school instruction, and they will go through the high school instructional model. Then we will do an additional session on interviewing and interview strategies and some good interview questions you need to be prepared to answer. And then you'll get a chance to practice interviewing with one of the EDs. And then from there, you will also have group time to work. And then you'll be able to finish. So what we are planning to do in the afternoon, or not the afternoon, because we're only there at 10:30, but from during that last hour block of time is you'll have 30 minutes with your group to work on your project while one group does interviews. And then we'll switch off. That's the plan as of now. And then any group that wants to stay, if they have additional work to do, we will leave the building open until 2. For you to do any of that work, and then Ms. Sadler will come and close up the building at 2. Does that sound good? Your group is ready to present and you don't have to stay. You'll be eligible to leave at 10:30. Sound good? Remember, when you're interviewing, you guys are getting an unfair advantage, which I love it. But you guys are getting to set a precedence and make yourself known as a candidate in this first round of interviews, because you're getting to go make your name known to all the EDs who will also be in the interview panel when we do administrative interviews. So you want to dress the part, you want to look the part, you want to come get you a big glass of coffee that morning so that you are ready to shine. And we will talk to you before we do it about some of the best things that you need, the best practices you need to think about, some of those things that Dr. Lamb has talked to you about. But this is a great opportunity for you, while the EDs have been involved throughout your coursework on Saturdays. This is a chance for them to get to talk to you one-on-one and for you to show your strengths, show how willing you are to learn and grow as a professional, and what you are going to bring to the table. And you want to set yourself apart from any other candidate they're going to interview. The other thing I'll say to you is, while you're not trying to one up your peer here, you got to shine for who you are so that you can get the best for yourself and your professional growth. So you want to make a statement. You want them to say, Dr. Lamb is one of my top picks. I remember him. I remember what he said. You want them to remember you. So you want to put some time and effort over the next couple of days into thinking about that, because you don't want them to walk away going, oh my gosh, Dr. Lamb, and I'm only picking on him because I'm not going to pick on any of you guys, but oh my gosh, Dr. Lamb, there's no way I would want him in my building. You don't want them saying that. You don't want them to say, Dr. Lamb doesn't know what he's talking about. Dr. Lamb, you don't mind me using you as an example, do you? But do you see what I'm saying? You want to make a strong first impression Saturday when you have the opportunity to talk to your the ED that you'll be assigned to. And it may be somebody that's in your level, and it may be somebody that's not in your level, because I don't know how Dr. Baltnight's going to set that up. But that is going to be a great opportunity for you to go ahead and connect strength with your name. Okay. So you're gonna get to make a first impression that will hopefully carry you through, because like Dr. Baltnight told you the last time, you want to be that person. The way we do interviews when the time comes is you will do interviews, and then you'll also interview with principals, and you want those principals to be saying, I want this one. I want this one. You don't want the one where you've got a position to where nobody's asked for you, right? You want them to be fighting over you. And that's important. And I think one of the things I always tell people that is hilarious to me, I never wanted to have anything to do with middle or high school in any capacity. I always wanted to be an elementary person. And I went to my interviews, and when I left, my top three schools that I selected on my list was Forest View, Hunter Huss, and Brookside. Brookside, because I had been teaching there, not for any other reason, because it was comfort, it was home, I knew it. Forest View and Hunter Huss were my top two schools. And the reason they were my top two schools, I knew nothing about high school, nothing other than I went to high school. The leader in that building, I wanted to be in a school where there was a leader who would push me to be my very best. And I chose getting out of my comfort zone to go somewhere. Kelly Gwaltney was at Hunter Huss, phenomenal. Robert Carpenter was at Forest View, phenomenal. I ended up at Forest View and gained so much experience because I had a principal who pushed me to become a principal. He equipped me, and you want to ask those kind of questions, and we'll talk more about that later, but don't go into it thinking I only want this, okay? Go into it being open to what opportunities are available and where am I going to get the most experience. Okay? Y'all ready to get started for today? Okay. Oh, let's think. Third. I have to do this, sorry. Third, kinder first, third, kinder fourth. Then I went to first grade, kinder one, third. So I taught for 8 years, so 96, 97, 99, 2001, 2, 3, 2003. Sound right? Right around then.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, that's a long time. I'm really old.
It's not as
Yeah.
long as 1880, like Dr. Lamb there.
That's exactly right. At least you were in this century. Exactly right.
So I just think it's important because you want to be in a place to where you are supported, where you are pushed, and where you are provided opportunities. So tonight we're going to continue, and I will relate it back to curriculum, I promise. But we are going to continue with what are the responsibilities of a principal that I'm going to have on my plate, and what do they have to do with curriculum, and what do I need to know about them? So we're going to talk about why change in just a minute, but we're going to first go into, remember last week we talked a lot about MTSS, right? And the MTSS framework. What is the first thing you have to address?
Attendance.
Attendance. They have to be at school. And then?
Behavior,
Then?
Academics.
Very good. And what is woven all throughout? We do not call it SEL. What do we call it?
Wellness.
Good job. Our wellness education. If you're in elementary, when do you do wellness education?
Morning meeting.
Morning meeting. If you're in middle school, when do they do wellness education?
Remix.
And your remix, your either in your homeroom time or your advisory time, or some schools are doing it in their social studies block. If you're in high school, when do you do it?
Doing it during the RAM time. Yeah.
You're in your
thanks.
advisory time.
Advisory,
Yes, very
yeah.
good. So when we look at MTSS, one of the things that happens is we have 3 tiers, right? You have your core, which is what everybody's doing, and you make sure that 80% of your students are mastering or are on track with that standard or that target that you are working toward. If they're not, then you do something different with those 20% to try and bridge the gap, to try to close that gap, and that's called your supplemental intervention. After you have implemented a supplemental intervention, which is 2 times a week, an additional intervention, then you are going to, for that, those few students who still have not shown mastery in that or are not making the progress they need to make, you are going to implement an intensive intervention, a tier 3 goal, which would up it to 4 times a week. Are y'all familiar with this? Elementary should be shaking their head. Yes, 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 yes. Middle school should be aware of this, and high school, we're implementing it now in high school. So we're at different places among the levels. So one of the things that Allison, she's my Allison in her name. It's not Miller, but I want to say Miller. One of the
McKee.
things, McKee, thank you. Don't tell her, y'all, that I didn't remember her name. She works for me and is like my right hand, and it could not come to me. So do not share that with her. I will hurt her feelings. Allison McKee, who is phenomenal. She was a psychologist, and she is getting her administration degree just like you guys. She will be finishing this year. But she helped us by aligning standard treatment protocols. The reason it is important for you to know these standard treatment protocols is because if you have a student who is experiencing attendance issues, it's going to give you step by step what you need to work on. I will have those linked when I share this presentation with you so that you can have access to them. The same thing with behavior. We created a behavior matrix that I'm going to give you a glimpse into in just a little while, but we have talked with our schools about how you have to have PBIS as your core. You have to have procedures. You have to teach the expectations in order for students to be able to be held accountable for those expectations. Just like we have to teach multiplication, we have to teach fractions, all of those things that we do, we have to teach before we can hold students accountable for them. And then we provide interventions. So we are working with our students this year to provide interventions. Then in academics, same thing. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But we have standard treatment protocols in each one of those areas. What area do you not see a standard treatment protocol?
the wellness.
The wellness. And the reason for that is this year we're building capacity at core. This year we are working with all of our teachers to teach wellness, because would you say as a district, we have truly taught wellness or social emotional learning over the past 3 years with capacity at all levels? So this year we're working on building capacity. Next year, you will see a standard treatment protocol for wellness so that we have those to follow. So that is our house. The guiding document that you will use in your role as assistant principal, if that's the route you go, is our student code of conduct. Y'all seen that, right? So here's what I will tell you. I'm getting ready to show you. This document goes with me everywhere. I have one in my car. Now, I do discipline for the district, so I'm going to have one a little more often than you. But one of the things I would recommend you going ahead and doing is getting a copy of this student code of conduct. And if you don't do anything else, on page, I think it's 3, page 2. On page 2 is a list of the rules and what they are. Become familiar with that. Know what those rules are and where to get it, because it's important for you as you begin to enforce consequences and go through and analyze student discipline and know what to do with it, that you know what our student code of conduct is. I'm going to click on that. Oh, maybe not. Yep, yes, I am. So in our student code of conduct, one of the things I wanted to show you, does anybody remember last week why we said knowing or handling discipline, how that impacts curriculum?
Minimizes disruption for lessons and, teaching, right? And I think that was essentially what we had talked about.
That's
It's
exactly
also-
what.
Yeah, also it measures the loss of instruction whenever it gets into going to the behavior lab and is out of school suspensions.
That's right. If you're doing your monitoring piece of discipline, that means you are monitoring that your teachers have procedures in place. As an assistant principal, the first month of school, the only walkthrough I ever did was on classroom procedures, expectations, and engagement. That's all I ever looked at. And only feedback I gave was on procedures, expectations, and engagement. Why? Because if you establish that right, the rest of it's going to fall into place. Alex Wallace, you just had a new baby. When you had your first one, you had to establish your expectations for her, correct?
Correct.
And if you do that well, now you can take her out in public and she knows what you expect out of her, doesn't she? For the most part.
For the most.
Absolutely. The same thing in our classrooms. And so you have to inspect what you expect. So if you're going to go in as the instructional leader or as an instructional leader, and the area that is assigned to you is discipline, then you're going to go in and make sure that those procedures are taught. You're going to make sure that it's evident that those procedures are in place and the expectations are being held consistently, fairly, that students are being retaught when they haven't mastered the procedures. And then you are going to look at student engagement. And you're going to provide teachers with feedback on that, because if they do that well that first month of school and then review it, Laura Benson, let's talk about Warlick, your middle school, where they have taught procedures and expectations in those 2 classrooms. Is there a difference?
There's a huge difference. Things run much smoother. We hardly have any discipline problems out of those classrooms. The students are always engaged. It's just a totally different environment from them having that experience at Camp Captivate this summer.
So that is such a crucial component that many times I will tell you. So if you get to go to a middle school or a high school, middle school and high school people, talk to me about the thought of teachers in regards to expectations, procedures, and processes.
I can answer that because I have a middle school and a high school. And so we see the difference immediately. A lot of times with the high school, they think that children are of a certain age, so expectations don't necessarily have to be taught or reinforced. And sometimes in the middle school, it's better. I think they are better equipped at doing that. So we spend a lot of time trying to reinforce teaching expectations in the high school setting. It's just a different, even maturity level with the students and what they do, like even some of the behaviors that they exhibit. We get to see it hands-on every day in the write-ups and discipline issues that we may have.
And we have to be real with our teachers in that teaching expectations and procedures are not going to eliminate behaviors, but they will decrease behaviors and they will increase engagement because students will know exactly what you need to do. So when we look at our student code of conduct, little advertisement, Dr. Booker, here's that page that I'm telling you is super important for you to know. You need to know that Rule 16 is the dress code. You need to know 23 is trespassing. What the world is integrity and civility, and how do I use that? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that today because I want you to be able to go into a school and be a strong instructional leader by the way that you handle the discipline in your building. The way that you don't look at discipline as I've got to get the kid out of school, but approach it in a way of I've got to engage the student successfully in the learning environment. Okay. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I wanted you to look and see in each one of our rules, there is a rule with an explanation. Then it has the consequence by level. So in this Rule 1, it says elementary school ranging from in-school disciplinary actions up to 5 days OSS. Compliance with the directions of the principals, teachers, or other school personnel. So if you have a student come to your office, or you have to go get a student in elementary school who is being totally defiant and saying, I'm not doing that, and you think they need 7 days out of school suspension, can you do that?
That would be a no, I believe. I'm reading that right.
Why can you not do that?
Up to
Because
5.
that's business.
It says up to 5 days, which means you don't get to go more than 5 days, even if you want to do that. It's up to 5 days. So it's important that you know that you have to follow, because there's board policy that states what these rules are and what the consequences are, and you have to follow that. The other thing that many administrators forget, I'm going to use bomb threats, communicating a false bomb report, or perpetuating a bomb hoax. See policy 4333 for complete policy, which means this is just a little blurb from that policy that tells me what we can and can't do, right? And I go up to the next slide and it tells me the consequences. But what do you think is a good idea for you to be familiar with before you enforce discipline?
The entire policy.
The entire policy. So we're going to go out of here for just a minute. Before I do, I'm going to show you on down here. We have 26 rules. We'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. But know that at the end of your code of conduct, here is the annual notification that goes out to parents. And it goes out in this book. Here it is. This talks about FERPA. It goes through and it'll talk about your attendance guidelines. It talks about EC students, McKinney-Vento students, student health records and expectations. All of those things are in our code of conduct. You need to be familiar with those. It talks about restraint. You have done the Greenblatt training every year in your state Vector Safe Schools training at the beginning of the year. This is what is advertised out. So you need to make sure you are familiar with those things and always know there's somewhere to go find this information. How you, let's see what else it talks about. Permissible use of seclusion and restraint. It's still going on about seclusion and restraints. Discipline policies, parent complaint and grievance procedures. There's procedures for everything you do. That's not really the reason we're doing this, so that's not the important part. But what I want you to know is that your code of conduct has a lot of information that you are going to need to use. So that's one of the most important parts for you to know how to support academics. Well, we this year as a district have come up with a tool that we have given to administrators. You're not going to have access to this yet because we only give it to our administrators. Okay. The reason B is that it's a resource guide. We implemented it this year. We're going to tweak it this summer for next year. And next year, if you become an assistant principal, you'll have access to this as well. But what we did to try to build some consistency, some reliability, and how we enforce those rules and how we follow that MTSS framework with our discipline, we created a resource guide. And you will notice one of the very first things that this says, this discipline guide has been developed as a resource for Gaston County School administrators. Who is it for?
Administrators.
Administrators.
Yeah.
Is it for parents?
Nope.
No,
Is it for teachers?
no,
No, because you as the administrator have the right to enforce discipline aligned to the code of conduct. This resource guide is aligned to the code of conduct, but we don't want it to block principals and administrators in. We want them to still have their ownership of their school and how they discipline students within their school. And it also, you notice it says this word resource. What does that mean?
It can be used as a guide.
It is a guide. That is exactly right. So let me tell you what we did this year. We took those same rules that are in your code of conduct, that page 2 that I was telling you about, and we listed them here. Okay. Disruption of school. When you click on disruption of school, it's hyperlinked and it'll pull you to, looks very similar to your code of conduct, correct? So with that, it has what the rule is, what the consequence is. This year we created a matrix for each one of the Power School state behavior discipline codes to talk about what does that look like. What does it look like for level 1? We worked with administrators at each level, elementary, middle, and high, so that then there was a progression for how we disciplined. Now, some of the feedback we've gotten just recently, some of these are not strenuous enough. We need to make some of these a little harder. That's okay. That's what the purpose of this is for us to develop a system to make it work. You will also notice, I'm going to use this one right here, threatening, aggressive language, attempting or intention to fight, pushing or shoving, because an attempt to fight is different than a fight, right? If somebody pushes another kid, are they fighting or are they being rough and pushing?
They're pushing. It's not a fight.
Not a fight. Even though sometimes a push can be aggressive, but guess what this behavior discipline code is called? Aggressive behavior. So a push is very aggressive. So we're saying, here's what you should start off, we're saying, with ISS. Some people want to send them straight home. One of the things we are working with our administrators on this year, and teachers are feeling it in the classroom, is that you've got to put interventions in place, just like you do if a kid doesn't know how to do multiplication. If a kid is not behaving the appropriate way, we have to do something different with that student to engage them the right way, or at least to try. So then we give them all of these I's mean interventions. So we even linked in behavior chart examples, and there's quite a few behavior charts so that administrators don't have to go look for that. It's all right there for them. All right, I'm going back to the table of contents. I want to show you one more and then we're going to keep going. Under bomb threats, one of the things that I think is the best about this is, remember we talked about in the bomb threat, it also says see policy 4333 for the complete policy. If you've ever been to our website, is finding a board policy easy? The answer to that's not really. It's pretty tough sometimes to find. So what we did was we linked the direct policy right here so that all you have to do is click on it and it will take you to our board policy that is aligned to that behavior so that you can then read the entire board policy. Okay, so why is that important for you to know? Because if you become an administrator, the goal is you're going to use this resource guide to address any behaviors that are not addressed at the core level. So the core is going to address through the use of PBIS is going to address the everyday stuff going on in classrooms. Then those tier 2 behaviors, you've got to know not only how to provide a consequence, but also how to provide an intervention and work with your teachers and your staff to provide interventions. The same thing for tier 3. Does that make sense? You are not quite as excited about that as I was.
I do have a question on that. Like, are we, as like, once we're administrators with that resource guide, are we required to do exactly what the resource guide says for that particular, like horseplay, for example? And it was like, I think it was just like call home or something for the high school, I want to say. I may have completely misread that, but like, say that's what it is. Like, are we required as administrators, or are we expected, I guess is a better word, as administrators to do that, to kind of, let me just leave it there. Are we expected to do that?
So here's what we told administrators when we met with them this summer to roll this out. We met with administrators from all levels to create this. But we knew that there was, because when we read it, there were some things that we were like, okay, you think we should just call home for this? We would have thought you would have done at least ISS for this, but okay. Because when you're not in the daily doing of discipline, you forget sometimes what that's like. So we met with them, and then we asked principals and assistant principals, if you are disciplining a student and you look at your resource guide and you go, oh, no. This says call home. And this kid has already horseplayed to the point somebody's busted their head up against the wall. Then you, as the administrator, have to stay within the code of conduct, but you may veer off from our matrix. Now, what we said was, if you have to veer off a good deal, then call Kimry McElhaney, is our PBI coordinator, our alternate education coordinator. And we said, call me, call Dr. Potts, or call Kimry, and we are going to make notes of that so that we can sit down and readjust. We gave our administrators this document as a digital copy only. We made it to where you couldn't even print it out. And the reason being is all of the links are live to our board policy. All of the links are live to our code of conduct, so that if any changes are made, those links keep you up to date and it's not an outdated document. But to answer your question, it is a guide. We hope you stay within the parameters of it, but you're going to have to go out, because discipline is not black and white.
Yeah, okay, right. That answers
So,
the question, absolutely.
Wood, how many times did we talk about arbitrary and capricious last semester?
Right.
You
I
got to go
cannot
to your
forget those
code of
words.
conduct. You can't give more punishment than the law allows. That'd be capricious. You got to stay within your guidelines. Dr. Payne, would you open that back up again and go back to bomb threat again for me, please?
I will be more than happy to. I'm going to sneeze. Hold on one second. There we go.
Okay. All right. So I thought I saw that before. So here's your pop quiz, folks, and you better get this one right from last semester. On all three of these, it says law enforcement may be contacted if required by law. Is it required by law to report a bomb threat to law enforcement?
I'm gonna say yeah.
Yes.
Based on where would I go to find that? You're right, but where would I go to find that if I didn't know?
I would use my common sense and say, that sounds like police should be involved.
Well, that
Personally, with a
but
bomb
now
threat?
I taught you this. You need to know this. This is real important. What's that document that we were in probably 4 or 5 different class sessions this summer?
Right. I forget the
that
name of it.
listed all the infractions that the state says you can't do in their schools. That now leaves it up to the local board to adopt the code of conduct in terms of consequences. But what does it say? It classifies all incidents into 3 different things: either reportable offenses, persistently dangerous, or unacceptable behavior. What is that document? Hello, is this thing working? What's that document? I'm gonna quit teaching if I can't do any better than this. North Carolina Disciplinary Data Reporting Manual. How many times did we go over that? You got to look in that thing every day, every time. If you're not sure, and Angie's right, if you get that feeling, you might better look it up. How many times have we talked about that? You don't have to remember everything, but you got to know where to look.
Where to
Share my
find it.
screen.
Oh, hold on, I gotta stop. So while he's sharing his screen, I'll tell you, that's one of the things we will do at the beginning of the year is you will get a document from us that goes in your flip chart that has this list on it. Also, an educator's handbook, you will notice that before your, when you write a student up, it says RO for you. It says UB for you, so that it tells you in educator's handbook, this is an RO, which is a reportable offense.
Okay. So right here, this is in North Carolina Disciplinary Data Reporting Manual. You've seen it a dozen times. Now, here's where I'm headed with this. What you have to be really careful of is you go and you go to your reference guide, and it says what you're supposed to do and the interventions and you know what your consequences can be. But what happens is you don't start entering it into Power School where all these things, when you go to Power School and you get bomb threat, it says, oh, RO, oh, I'm supposed to call the law. What happens? What happens if you don't enter it into Power School today? If you wait till tomorrow to enter it into Power School. All right, I think Daphne said it, her resolve. How many hours you got to get when you have something like this? How many hours have you got before you got to call the law?
24.
24. If you're outside of that, you might as well have not called them. You got 24 hours to call the police on something like this. So you better keep your manual handy. That's why we showed it to you, because you may not go into Power School every day to enter the incident in. You may not process it till tomorrow, but you better have that handbook handy. So you don't have to have unacceptable behavior. You get 2 days on those 48 hours. But what if you mistook this for a 48-hour one and it was a 24-hour one? Uh-oh. You know, I can't tell you enough times. You got to know what your resources are. You can't get this wrong but once. You can't blunder into one of these and not call the police and then something bad happened. And then, well, I was going to call them, or I didn't remember, or I didn't know, or I didn't look it up, or I hadn't entered it into Power School yet. When you see bomb threat, first thing you ought to think when you see any infraction is this a reportable or not? Is this going to count against my persistently dangerous total? And if I don't know that, if I hadn't memorized it, I better know where my manual is. And I had that manual in 7 different places in your shell over the summer, so that you could not avoid that manual. It is the Bible for all reporting in North Carolina. You cannot lose that manual. This is real. This matters now. Now they can give you a code of conduct, and they can make you an ancillary handbook to give you some guidance on these things. But now, if you step outside the law, they're not going to know you. They're going to blame me. They're going to say we identified all these great people from Gaston County and gave them to Dale, and boy, he made a mess out of it. We just don't know what happened. They'll throw me under the bus in a heartbeat. So again, you know, that manual is your Bible. Anytime we start talking about discipline, about anything, you'll find your Bible. Go find your manual, because it not only it has all of these things, it has consequences, it has offender type, it has scenarios, it has how to report when there's more than one thing. All that stuff is right there in front of you. And if you don't use it, that's on you. But again, to get back to the original point with Dr. Payne is that we're talking with Wood, they've given you a range here so that you don't fall outside of that range and be accused of being arbitrary or capricious. Capricious is given too much punishment. Do you remember our first case study from the summer? What did the teacher do for a kid who turned in his brother's homework? She failed him for the year. She excluded him for a whole year. She made one homework assignment count more than half the yearly grade and failed him in the 8th grade. Seems a little excessive, doesn't it? If you turn in your brother's homework assignment and fail for the whole year, get excluded for a whole year, that seems a little bit capricious. And obviously it is. And that's what we worry about, staying within our guidelines. But we got that doesn't mean that we still got to remember what our reporting responsibility is. We can't walk away from that. We can't say, well, I was doing this and wasn't doing that. And because you don't make that mistake but once. And the police department will throw you right under the bus and back it up over you, as they should. So again, my rant for the evening is I know you know this stuff. Start putting the pieces together.
And I would agree with that because it's so important. I will be your person that you will contact if, hold on. That's my earbud. Can y'all hear me now? Okay. I will be the person that you call. So when you start to do discipline stuff, it is always, always, always better to go slow, do a thorough investigation. What do you have to give every child?
Due process.
You have to give every child due process. And then when you go, I don't know, you're going to have Jill Payne on speed dial and you're going to call me and we're going to talk through. Because what you want to do is make sure you do it, like Dr. Lamb said, accurately on the front end. Because if you do it inaccurately, then you have to dig out of that for a long time coming up on the back end. And so you want to make sure that you are doing right by children and legally right on the front end. So it's always, always, always better to ask questions. Don't feel like you have to make a decision right now. Have you had a suspension at your school or a student that's been suspended at your school and you've heard them say suspended pending investigation? That is, you have up to 24 hours on those ROs and up to 48 hours on those UBs, but we don't do PDs from the principal level. If you have a PD at the principal level, you have to call me so that we talk through it and we make sure you're on track doing everything you're supposed to do as a safety protocol to make sure that you're not going off on a limb and don't have all your ducks together. So your ROs and your UBs, you can always send a student home, maintain safety in your building, take one breath, and then do your finish your investigation to make your decisions. That gives you enough time to call somebody. And 9 out of 10 times when you call me, principals get really frustrated because you're going to call me and I'm going to say, let me do some research and I'll call you right back, because you have to trust but verify. So I'm going to encourage you strongly, when your teachers write up a referral, you've got to trust but verify. Have you ever written a student up and you've been emotional? Which means probably it came across maybe a little harsher than it was. I'll use the example of my 19-year-old come home. She called me yesterday morning. She was coming home anyway. She was just miserable. I can't talk. She was crying. I'm aching all over, all this stuff. And I was like, oh, my husband just told me to be nice. But I was like, oh, dear Gussie, we've got to make her a doctor's appointment. Let me get one made. And I got online. I made her a doctor's appointment. She got out of her lab to come home early so she could go to the doctor and be at the doctor on time. Afterwards, she realized she didn't have strep. She didn't have anything else. She was fine. But in the moment, it was a lot worse than it really was, right? So you're going to have teachers that write up an incident with no negligent thoughts. They're not trying to make it sound worse, but in the heat of the moment, they write it up a little bit harsher or a little bit exaggerated compared to what really happened. Not all teachers, but that's going to happen. Your job as the administrator is to trust but verify. My job at the district is when you call me and say, Dr. Payne, we don't understand this. Let's talk through this one. I'm going to take all the information and then I'm going to trust and then I'm going to verify. So I'm going to pull that kid up. I'm going to look at your information. I'm going to look to see if they have an IEP. Have you done everything you're supposed to do? I'm going to look at their 504. Have you done everything you're supposed to do? Whatever it is, to make sure you're in compliance and to make sure we are making the best, most accurate decision for that student. So it's super important for you to do that with your staff as well. Any questions about discipline?
Dr. Payne, you mentioned if it's a PD, it comes directly to you, like we need to contact you. What is
Yes.
PD?
Persistently dangerous.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. And you will not have the option in Educator's Handbook. I'm going to stop sharing because this is not working and let me try it again. You will not have the option to put a PD in. We have to enter those in my office solely because if you've got a PD, I need to make sure you don't make light or you don't. I want to make sure that you take it as serious as it needs to be taken because we don't typically keep persistently dangerous in our traditional school settings. Okay. All right, I'm going to try this again. So let's see. Hold, please. Zoom, share screen so that we can finish this up. Here we go. Okay, so the next one, this next level. So we've talked about attendance. We talked about behavior. That'll be your focus for a lot of your assistant principal roles is how do I improve the behavior and in the engagement in my classrooms so that learning can take place. However, we have talked about, and I want you to be familiar with the academic interventions. So we use Spire, MegaWords, TransMath. We also use AMC in elementary. We use some of our M-Class Dibbles stuff, but elementary does their interventions for the most part in their flex time, which is 45 minutes a day. Middle school does it within their block, and they allocate 30 minutes a day within each one of their blocks to provide interventions. And high school, we have them in our freshman classes, and they are working with our sophomore classes this year in their core class. And that is in your foundation classes. So your foundation of English, your foundation of math classes is the majority of places you're going to see. And again, they do that within their instructional block. Fire and MegaWords are scripted program as well as TransMath. TransMath does a great job going back and filling in those deficit skills to help close the gap. Most of our middle and high schools are using MegaWords, but we have some schools where we are doing Spire for our lower level readers. Okay. Our core tier 1 wellness education is, we've already talked about that, but you will see it doesn't say SEL anywhere, but these are the 5 components of SEL, of our wellness education that we teach in our schools, which is self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. And we have a theme every month, K-12, that we use that, or that we have lessons that are taught for that. And there is a Google folder that is shared with each one of our teachers so that they have access to the lessons that belong to them so that they can teach them in their class. So that is our MTSS overview. And I wanted to give you guys a few minutes to share any questions that you may have regarding MTSS. So my question, okay.
I was going to say for Saturday's interviews, do you anticipate questions on MTSS from some of the So and what might a question be formed as? I mean, would it be like level specific? So would it be like, what would this look like in a high school, or how would you see this in a high school, or well, how would you see that phrase, or do you anticipate that coming up on Saturday?
Well, I think they purposefully did not tell me the questions so that I couldn't tell y'all before, because I haven't been given answers to them yet. However, I think it's important for you to know generally about MTSS. That's one reason I spent the last 2 weeks on that, is because you have to know your role. But the big thing is that you need to know our core because core is K-12. So our core instruction is the instructional models at each level. Our core behavior is PBIS. Our core wellness is our wellness education that are the lessons that they teach. And our attendance expectations are the same. I think if you can talk generally about it, then you would be fine. They're not going to expect you in any situation to come in and be an expert at any level. They're going to expect that you can come in and be knowledgeable of the overview of MTSS. They're going to expect that you would talk about what it looks like in the setting that you're in. So when I went to interview, go ahead.
I'm sorry. What did I have you do last semester? I had you do an audit at your school of what your MTSS program was. Did I not have you do that? And when you file that in your discussion board, didn't I tell you the takeaway on that is you got to know what your school offers. That's all you're expected to know is what your school offers. Do you offer 30, 60, or 90 days? What do your tiers look like? We went through that. You're supposed to already know that at your school that you are currently at, unless you changed since last semester. You're supposed to know what MTSS looks like at your school, because that's one of the questions you'll be asked in the interview process when you get to the principal interview. Now, I don't know what interview they're going to work with you. You know, we talked about the 4 different types of beginning interviews. You need to go back and review those. Now, I've got a list of questions that you'll be asked at the principal interviews, and that's one of the ones that you'll be asked. All those things, those activities that I had you do last semester, those are the kinds of things that you'll be asked at the principal level interview. That's why we had you go out and do those things. You know, so you should know what MTSS looks like at your school. If you don't remember, go back to our shell and look at what you filed under that discussion board question from the summer. Go back and look at that if you don't remember what MTSS looks like at your school.
The other thing I will tell you, and I don't know this, but one of the things that has happened quite a bit is a scenario in an interview. I will never forget the scenario from when I interviewed as an assistant principal, because I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? But you have to stop and think. And I think that's the key, is think so that you can pull from those things you've learned throughout your program. The scenario I was given was, you have an EC student who has started jumping from table to table in the cafeteria. What do you do? And I had to stop and think, step 1, what would I do? Step 2, what would I do? Step 3, what would I do? And I was given 15 minutes to write. Now, you won't be given this on Saturday because you're not going to have that kind of time. But I had to sit down and think about, and I was able to make some notes and collect my thoughts about what I would do and who I would involve and what was going on, so that I could, then I went and met with the interview team and had to present that. So we did round robin at my real interview. And that was one of my things, is I had to go sit down and process what would I do in that situation. So what do you think you would do in that situation?
Hopefully you'd
First
have
of all,
a team. Yeah, go ahead.
with any student, or EC or not, my first instinct would be, honey, what are you looking for? What do you need? Because sometimes they're just bouncing from spot to spot just because they need something. And that might be my
Daphne,
first
this student was up on top of the tables.
Oh, you said, I didn't hear on top of the table. I said going from table to table.
On top of the tables, jumping from table.
Oh, literally jumping.
My immediate concern is actually for the students and other students, like well-being and safety, so I mean, that's where my mind immediately goes first. So I want to be closer to that situation, and hopefully have a team of individuals that are equipped to handle a situation like that. But my gut, I mean, other than that, I really don't know what I would.
So we'll stop for just a minute and try this. I want everybody right now to think about your classroom. If one of your kids got up and started jumping from table to table, what would you do?
Remove the audience.
Remove the audience. You're gonna have to have a plan to evacuate that cafeteria. What's the next
Right.
thing you're gonna do?
Call for support.
Call for help. Look at you,
Mhm.
Chalet, rocking this.
There it
What's the
is.
next thing you're gonna do?
I would probably interview the student. Like I would talk to the student and try to figure out what is the mindset there. Like, why are you doing this? Like, what are you doing? And I, like, when she said call for support, I would think if they're an EC student, then you're going to want to get the EC teacher involved, whoever is their case manager at your school. They would need to be involved.
Time out a minute, Andy, I want to ask you a question. Is it important for you to know your kids?
Yes.
Is it important for you in an elementary, middle, or high to know which kids are EC?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. You don't realize the importance of it until you're in that situation and you're in the cafeteria and this kid's jumping from table to table and you're like, who is this kid and what's going on? It is
Right. That
so
might be
important.
like a normal behavior for them. Like you have to know what's normal for that kid, what's normal for that kid. Like, is this a common behavior? Is this something that we kind of have to, be aware of in the future, or has this happened before? Because that happens, in all of our schools, I'm sure. There's just like the frequent flyers or like, the screamers and stuff like that. Or like you hear it when you go down, you pop in, everything good, like,
Mhm.
is it too much for the teacher? Is the teacher, is that the one that can handle that? It just happens for 30 seconds and they got it. Or do I need to get the kid
Mhm.
out?
You're exactly right. Laura Benson, I'm gonna call on you again just because she and I have worked closely together with some of this stuff this year. Is it important to know the triggers of the students?
Absolutely.
Because if
And
you know the triggers, what can that prevent?
you took me straight to an incident. It can prevent a whole bunch of things if you know the student and you also know how to, in our instances, de-escalate the student, to remove them from what the environment is that's causing, or the person. Sometimes it's the person that's causing that situation for them. But we deal with a lot of triggers, and most of our students know their triggers, and they can communicate that with you in that moment, so that can help you help them.
So it is important for you to know your students. It's important for you to, I heard Angie say, to know if they're EC or not. You've got to know all the conditions. So the most important thing that we started with on day one that you have to do as an administrator is what? Before you can do anything else effectively.
Know your students, know your staff.
You got to know them and you got to build something.
Relationships.
Build relationships.
Build relationships.
You've got to build relationships. One of my greatest stories, I was 8 months pregnant at Forest View, and there was my friend John, and I built a relationship with John. John knew me. John was probably the most dangerous kid that I had met. But guess what? John was my best friend because I'm a smart administrator, and those kids that are going to be the hardest to get, they're going to love me because I'm going to need them to respond to me. Doesn't mean I'm going to lower my standards for them or any of that. I need them to respond to me to keep everybody else safe. And John was in the middle of getting ready to get into a fight. He was all up in somebody's face, and I took my 8-month little pregnant self and got between him and the other student. And I just kept saying, John, look at me, look at me. And when he got to where he truly heard and looked down at me, he backed off. But I had invested in a relationship with him. You've got to invest in relationships with your kiddos, with your staff, so that you can be the person to go in and help de-escalate. Okay. Again, all of this deals with curriculum in the fact that the year one, you're not necessarily going to be the person in every school that is able to go in and invest in curriculum like you want to do. You'll get that chance, but you're going to start off dealing with discipline, and you have to remind yourself every single day, every single week, that you are impacting curriculum by increasing the engagement in your classrooms by being a strong leader of discipline and engagement. Okay. So I just wanted to bring it all full circle back to what we talked about the very first week, which was build relationships, know your staff, know your students. Sometimes it is just me having a conversation and saying, Wood, this is not the best way to deal with that student. That's something that sends him over the edge. Why don't you try blah, 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 blah? I've seen that work in other situations. Helping that teacher know how to engage with that student successfully. Helping that student know how to engage with that teacher successfully. And then you'll have your tier 3 kids, which are kids that would be referrals for alternative placement or some type of day treatment or a mental health setting. And then you would work directly with me on those. Ultimately, your goal in year 1 is to stay familiar with instructional practices, be in as many PLCs as you can be in. But when you don't get to go to a PLC, remember that you handling discipline in your classroom allows teachers to teach. And that's your way to support them. And they will feel and appreciate your support in their classroom. Okay. So next, we've got Saturday's meeting, and then we have next week. I will be calling from Louisiana next week because I have to go to a school in Louisiana. Never been there before. I'm super excited, but I will be calling from there. So Dr. Lim, I may have to get you to share your screen or let them go through your share screen if I am not strong connectivity, but I should be because I've got my hotspot. Does anybody have questions about next week that you need to answer today?
Is
We
that
will review
7:30
it
as
again
well?
on Saturday.
Is that next week is 7:30? Or no?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. If
thanks.
we can, just because I don't know what time we'll get back from the school and all that. And that way I don't have to call you at the last minute and say we're running late.
Okay.
Does that work for everybody?
I have a question. I
Yes,
was
ma'am.
able to make the interview session last week with Dr. Lam. I was wondering if there was a recorded session that was posted.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I will, I think, I thought I did, but if I didn't, I will post it under this week. What week is this in our shell?
14, I think.
14, I think, yeah.
14. All right, I'll post it again here. I sent it out to everybody after the session last week. If you'll check your email, I sent it directly to your GuardTheWeb email address, and I'll post it. I'll go back and pick it up and post it under tonight's session, week 14 as well. And the materials, the interviewing materials should already be in your shell. Let me check that right quick.
It's there. I saw that, the written
Okay.
material. I just
Materials are
wanted-
there, and I'll post the video under again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Has anybody else got questions? 7:30, bright and early Saturday morning with your cup of coffee. If you're like me with your Diet Sundrop. Dr. Lamb, thank you for all your support this semester. And
Thank you.
I will absolutely, I will see you guys on Saturday morning. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.